subscribe.
People think a front desk job is about smiles. It's not. Not here. I work nights at a hotel in downtown Los Angeles that never uses its real name in conversation unless it has to. Officially, it's been renovated, rebranded, reimagined urban living, if you believe the website. Boutique lighting. Minimalist furniture. Words like historic charm carefully placed between glossy photos. But buildings don't forget. You can sand down the banisters, repaint the walls, swap out carpets every 5 years. None of that touches what's soaked in before you got here. This place has seen too much for too long. Drugs, violence, disappearances, people who checked in and never properly checked out. The kind of history that gets buried in articles nobody reads and police reports nobody finishes. And then there are the residents. Because that's what they are, really. Guests stay a night or two. Residents stay because they have nowhere else to go, or nowhere else that will take them. The hotel sits in that gray area between hospitality and survival. Cheap enough for long-term stays. Anonymous enough for people who don't want questions. I've been here 3 years. Graveyard shift. Midnight to 8. Long enough to know most of them by name, or at least by habit. There's Luis in 302, who hasn't paid on time in months, but always manages to scrape something together just before management gets serious. He talks to himself in Spanish, full conversations, sometimes laughing like someone just told him a joke I can't hear. There's Marianne in 417, who orders room service every night at exactly 2:13 a.m. The same thing, soup and bread. She never opens the door more than a crack, and I've never seen her face clearly. Then there's the rotating crowd. The ones who stay a week, maybe 2. People with hollow eyes and fast speech. People who carry their lives in trash bags. People who avoid mirrors and elevators and eye contact. You learn to read them. Who's trouble? Who's just lost? Who might not make it through the month? And you learn what not to report. That's the other part of the job no one tells you about. You're not just checking people in. You're filtering reality. Deciding which problems escalate and which ones get quietly ignored. Because if you called the police for everything that happens here, they'd never leave. Some nights are quiet, too quiet. The kind where the hum of the fluorescent lights starts to sound like something breathing. Other nights feel like the building itself is awake, restless, shifting around you. The elevators are the worst. They don't always stop where they're supposed to. Not broken, just wrong sometimes. Doors opening on floors no one pressed. Doors staying open too long. Once I watched one come down from the top floor and open in the lobby with no one inside, even though I'd just seen the indicator move. He checked in for a week and just never left. Paid regularly, didn't cause trouble, kept mostly to himself. Room 509. At first, he was unremarkable, quiet, polite, the kind of guest you barely notice. Then the complaints started. Footsteps at night, running in the hallways, doors slamming. Guests on the 5th floor calling down angry, half asleep, asking what the hell was going on up there. I'd check the cameras. At first, nothing, empty corridors, closed doors. The kind of silence that feels staged, like the building is holding its breath. Then one night, I saw him, Carl, barefoot, sprinting down the hallway. Not jogging, not pacing. Sprinting like something was chasing him. He stopped abruptly, outside one of the rooms. 511, I think, and just stood there, staring at the door. Then he started talking. Not loudly, not like an argument. More like he was answering someone. Short, urgent replies, nods, pauses, listening to something I couldn't hear. After a minute, he ran again. That was when I called upstairs. No answer from his room. Next night, it got worse. Screaming this time. Not words at first, just raw noise. The kind that cuts through walls and wakes people up 2 floors down. I was already dialing security when it turned into words. "They're here again!" Over and over. "They're in the halls. They won't stop." Security went up. I watched on the monitors as they found him halfway down the corridor, pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. They brought him down to the lobby. Up close, he looked wrong. Not drunk, not high, though I've seen enough of both to recognize them. This was something else. His eyes kept moving, tracking things that weren't there. His head turning slightly, like he was listening to voices just behind him. "You need to keep it down," I told him, keeping my voice steady. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You don't hear it?" he asked. "Hear what?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on something important. "The corridors." I didn't answer. "They walk them," he said. "All night, back and forth, back and forth." Security shifted beside him, impatient. "Sir, you need to go back to your room." Carl didn't move. "They don't stop," he said, louder now. "They don't ever stop." We got him back upstairs eventually. Management made a note, told me to keep an eye on him. Like I wasn't already. For a few nights, things settled. Then came the water. Guests started complaining about the taps. Not the water itself, just the sound. Knocking in the pipes, a kind of irregular banging that came and went at odd hours. Maintenance blamed old plumbing. Of course they did. Carl came down again 2 nights later. This time, he didn't wait for security. He ran straight through the lobby, shouting, "They're in the walls now!" People turned. A couple sitting in the lounge froze mid-conversation. "They're not supposed to be there!" He grabbed the edge of the desk, leaning over it, eyes wide and desperate. "You have to let her out." "Who?" I asked before I could stop myself. He stared at me. "The girl." Something cold moved through me then, just a flicker, gone as quickly as it came. "There's no—" "She's in the water tank," he shouted. That did it. Security grabbed him, tried to pull him back. "She won't stop screaming," Carl yelled, fighting them now. "She never stops." Management called it in. Authorities came, not police, someone else. Plain clothes, efficient, the kind of people who don't ask questions out loud. They handled it quickly. Too quickly. I watched from behind the desk as they brought him through the lobby, hands restrained, still talking, still struggling. Then, just before they reached the door, he broke free for half a second, just long enough to grab me. His grip was strong, stronger than it should have been. He pulled me close, his face inches from mine. And for the first time since this started, he was calm, clear. "The voices never stop," he said quietly. "They walk the corridors." I didn't move. The girl in the water tank won't stop screaming. My throat felt tight. She never stops, he repeated. Then his grip tightened, just slightly. And they won't let her out! They pulled him away. The doors closed. And just like that, he was gone. Officially, he was transferred. Medical reasons, no further incidents. That's what the report says. The 5th floor is quieter now. No more running, no more screaming. But sometimes, late at night, when the lobby is empty and the elevators hum and the building settles into itself, I hear footsteps upstairs, steady, measured, back and forth, and every now and then, if the pipes start knocking just right, I think I hear something else. Something faint, something distant, something that sounds a lot like screaming.
Hotels teach you things about people they don't put in brochures. The brochures show champagne in silver buckets, white sheets folded into impossible corners, and women in clean uniforms smiling over carts full of fluffy towels. They show lobbies with chandeliers and glossy floors you could eat off. They show doormen opening polished brass handles for families on vacation, and businessmen with rolling suitcases, and women in heels who look like they have somewhere better to be. They never show you what gets left behind after the doors close. My name doesn't matter. If you've ever stayed in a hotel, you've passed 10 women like me without seeing us. We move around you with our carts and our bins and our tired shoes, and most of the time you don't even look up. To you, a room becomes clean by magic. To us, it becomes clean because somebody had to touch what you left there. And people leave everything. They leave half-eaten room service burgers fused to the carpet. They leave diapers and ice buckets. They leave wigs, false teeth, used condoms, dirty needles, cracked phones, wedding rings, soaked mattresses, and things humming in dresser drawers that no one wants to pick up with bare hands. They leave bathrooms painted in vomit after bachelor parties. They leave beds ruined by blood, wine, makeup, and worse. Sometimes they leave human waste in places you would not believe another human mind could imagine. On the pillow, in the sink, smeared down the wall behind the curtains like they wanted to make sure someone had to see it. A darker, but unfortunately, just as true activity that happens more than people like to admit at hotels is that hotels are very popular places for people to, let's say, game end themselves. It's dark, it's morbid, and in a selfish way, it's hell for us maids. You learn fast not to ask why. That's the first rule. The second is that every hotel lies. Not out loud, not directly. But there is a layer of silence spread over everything like polish on wood. Guests want to believe their room is theirs alone, that nothing bad has ever happened in it, that no one has cried there, cheated there, died there. Management wants the same thing because clean stories sell rooms better than true ones. So things get handled quietly. A deep clean gets ordered. A mattress disappears. Carpets get changed. Security blocks off a floor for maintenance. Someone from corporate says the right words in a voice that means, don't repeat this outside the building. By next week, there's a new family in the room, taking photos for social media, saying how nice the lighting is. One of the things that gets buried fastest is how often people come to hotels to game end themselves. I know that phrase sounds strange, but that's how some of the girls say it, because the real words sit too heavy in your mouth. Maybe it makes it easier. Maybe nothing does. People think it happens more in lonely apartments, garages, bridges. It happens there too. But hotels? Hotels are perfect for it. Anonymous, temporary, no neighbors who know your habits, no landlord checking in, no family member coming home early. Just one key card, one locked door, one little square of privacy rented by the night. I've walked in on a few. Usually, you know before you fully know. There's a wrongness in the room before your brain names it. The air feels used up. The silence is too complete. Sometimes the TV is still on, bright and cheerful, talking to no one. Sometimes the shower is running. Sometimes there's a smell that reaches you first, metallic or sour or sweet in the worst way. You back out. You call security. You stand there with your cart and your gloves and your heart hammering in your throat while men in suits suddenly start speaking softly into radios. You tell yourself not to look. You always look. Most of them blur together now. That sounds cold, but it's how you survive work like this. If every room came home with you, you'd never sleep. So your mind sands the edges off. You remember a pair of shoes lying neatly by the bed, a Bible open on the nightstand, a woman's coat hanging in the closet, a phone still charging on the desk. Little ordinary things that become unbearable once the room is no longer ordinary. But one has never left me. It happened in October during a week when the hotel was packed with a dental convention and 2 wedding parties. We were fully booked, which meant everyone was angry about something. Not enough towels, too much noise, wrong pillows, late checkouts. I had 16 rooms on my board and 3 of them were disasters before noon. Room 614 was supposed to be a standard turnover. One guest, male, checked in 2 nights earlier with no luggage, besides a carry-on. He'd kept the Do Not Disturb sign hanging the whole stay. Front desk had tried calling him at checkout and got no answer. That wasn't unusual. People overslept, ignored the phone, stumbled out hungover at 1 in the afternoon expecting sympathy. It happened every week. I knocked 3 times. Housekeeping? Nothing. Again, louder. Then I used my key card and pushed the door with my shoulder, already halfway through my usual apology. Sorry, just housekeeping. The room was dark, curtains still drawn. Not messy exactly. Stillness has its own kind of neatness. The bed was made too carefully, as if he'd smoothed it by hand before morning. His wallet sat on the desk beside the hotel pen and notepad. His watch was folded on top of his clothes. On the television, the screen glowed blue with no signal, casting the whole room in that dead aquarium light. I smelled something sharp and coppery under the lemon cleaner from the hall. I called out again, softer this time. Then I saw the bathroom door standing open. There are moments in life where your body understands something a full second before your mind catches up. My feet stopped, my chest tightened so hard it hurt. I remember the housekeeping cart outside the room, one wheel clicking against the baseboard because I hadn't locked it. I remember the hum of the ice machine down the hall. I remember thinking, absurdly, that someone in 612 was laughing at a sitcom. The tub was full of dark water. He was in it. I won't tell it the ugly way. I don't want to. I don't need to for you to understand. He had done terrible things to himself before the end. Things deliberate and final. The kind of injuries that made it clear he had wanted to remove parts of himself from the world, as if seeing and speaking had become unbearable burdens. The water around him was nearly black. His head was tilted back against the tile. He had removed his own eyes and placed the viscera on the sink. He had cut out his own tongue and tossed it into the white porcelain bowl like it was a roll of tissue paper. What remained of his face was pointed toward the ceiling, and on the mirror, written in drying brown-red streaks with a shaking hand, were the words, "I can't watch any more, and I can't talk to you. So why talk at all?" I didn't scream right away. That's the part people always expect. But real fear isn't theatrical at first. At first it's a freezing, a lockup. My hand still held the doorknob. My mouth opened and nothing came out. I remember staring at the writing because reading felt easier than looking anywhere else. The letters were uneven, dragged downward in places where his hand must have slipped. There were fingerprints in the edges of the words. Smears. Proof of effort. Then I noticed something else. There was writing on the hotel notepad, too, left on the vanity by the sink. Not words. Just lines pressed so hard into the paper they had nearly torn through. Line after line after line, all written over one another until the page looked carved instead of marked, as if he had sat there trying to say something and failed, or as if he'd been listening to something in that room and the only answer he had left was pressure. That was when I ran. Afterward came the usual machinery, security, police, statements. A manager with a hand on my shoulder and a voice like velvet telling me I should go home for the day. The floor got closed. Guests complained because they always complain. By evening, rumors were moving through the staff hallways faster than carts. By next morning, most of the details had already been ironed flat into something easier to file. A distressed guest, a tragic incident. Please do not discuss active investigations. But housekeepers talk. We always do. Quietly out of earshot, folding sheets and replacing shampoo bottles while we trade the truths management wants lost. One of the older maids told me the man had been hearing voices or seeing things or both. Another said the police found no history on him at all, like he'd appeared out of nowhere with cash and a fake address. Another swore the night auditor had gotten a call from 614 at 3:11 a.m. and heard nothing on the line except wet breathing and a whisper that sounded like more than one voice trying to use one throat. I don't know what's true. I only know what I saw after. Because 2 days later, after they cleaned the room and replaced the mirror and changed the mattress and opened 614 back up like nothing had happened, I had that room on my sheet again. I almost refused it. But jobs like this don't leave much room for refusal. The room looked perfect. Crisp corners, fresh towels, new soap. No sign of what had happened except a faint scratch on the vanity and a smell beneath the bleach that lived mostly in my memory. I changed the sheets, wiped the glass, vacuumed under the bed. I did everything by the book. Then while I was restocking coffee pods, the television turned on by itself. Blue screen, no signal. I told myself it was faulty wiring. Then the bathroom mirror fogged. Not all at once, just a pale bloom in the center, like breath against cold glass. On it slowly, as if traced by an unseen fingertip from the other side, appeared one word. Look! I dropped the coffee pods. I ran so hard my cart tipped over in the hall. I still work in hotels. Funny, isn't it? You'd think I'd quit. But work is work, and fear doesn't pay rent. I still strip beds and scrub sinks and smile at guests who don't see me. I still walk into rooms where people have left every kind of filth a body can make. But now, whenever I enter a bathroom, I look at the mirror first. And sometimes, in the rooms where no one's staying, when the hall is quiet and the ice machine hums and the TV in an empty room flickers blue, I think something in there is still trying to be seen.
I'd been with the Bureau 14 years when Atlantic City handed me a corpse that solved my case and taught me that sometimes life can be a cruel comedy. By then, the press had already named him the Night Porter. They always do that. They give monsters a title polished enough to fit on a headline and say it enough times that it starts to sound like a person instead of a pattern of blood and panic. The reality, though, was uglier and far more ordinary. He was a hotel employee, sometimes front desk, sometimes maintenance, sometimes security on paper, depending on which place had hired him and how carefully they checked references. He drifted up and down the East Coast, never staying long, never building a life anywhere that might leave roots. He hunted women who traveled alone. He would study reservations, ask seemingly harmless questions at check-in, notice the single room, the one key card, the absence of a husband's name or kids on the booking. He knew which guests ordered one breakfast, who asked the desk for directions by themselves, who came down in a business suit with conference badges. He waited until the hotel settled into that dead zone after midnight, when the elevators ran empty, and even the ice machines seemed to hesitate before making noise. Then he used a master keycard to enter their rooms. Some died quickly, some didn't. The first scene I caught in person was in Richmond. A pharmaceutical sales rep, 32, found half under the bedspread as if she'd tried to burrow out of the world. The room was spotless, except for what mattered. No forced entry, no theft worth mentioning. Her purse still sat open on the desk, lipstick beside a room service menu. The killer had worn gloves, but he wasn't meticulous in the way TV serial killers are meticulous. He was practical. He counted on the hotel itself swallowing his presence. Cameras in hallways weren't always working. Staff turned over too quickly. Master key logs were incomplete, erased, or accidentally overwritten. He used the infrastructure of hospitality as a weapon. That was the part that got under my skin. The betrayal of it. Hotels are built on temporary trust. Here's your room. Here's your privacy. Here's a log. Sleep easy. He slipped through that promise like rot through plaster. By victim 4, the behavioral analysis people thought we were dealing with a sexual sadist with organized habits and occupational mobility. By victim 6, we knew he was changing names, using forged employment records, likely buying identities from one of the usual marketplaces. By victim 8, I stopped telling the families we were close. Behavioral. I said other things instead. We're making progress. We're coordinating across field offices. He can't keep this up forever. That last one was true, though not in the way I expected. The body turned up in an Atlantic City hotel off the boardwalk in late November, when the sea air gets mean and everything in town looks a little abandoned, even when it isn't. Housekeeping found him in the room 814 because checkout had come and gone, and the occupant hadn't answered repeated knocks. The room had been booked for 2 nights under a woman's name, Elise Warren. When patrol first called it in, it sounded like gangland noise. Unknown male, badly beaten, shot multiple times, possible robbery. Then the details started piling up wrong. The victim was white, late 30s to early 40s, medium build, heavy bruising to the face and torso, wrists lacerated, 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, and 1 centered neatly between the eyes. Execution style, the local detective said. There was no wallet, no phone, no luggage, except a cheap duffel containing hotel uniforms from 3 different states, 2 counterfeit IDs, and a magnetic card encoder. That got my attention. By the time I arrived, the room already smelled of fingerprint powder, old cigarette smoke from decades when smoking had still been allowed, and the sour metal tang of blood soaked into carpet. The dead man was on his back near the bed, 1 shoe missing, jaw swollen to twice its size. He looked like he had been questioned before he was killed. Not in an interview room sense. In the older, simpler human sense. Pain applied until answers fell out. One of the Atlantic City detectives, a vice veteran named Coyle, stood beside me with a coffee and said, "You've got that look." "What look?" "Like you know him." I studied the face. Most killers are strangers, even when you've spent years chasing them. You know their work, not their features. But there were things in that room that fit too cleanly to ignore. The uniforms, the encoder, the master key cards in the duffel, each marked in grease pencil by hotel and date. And the victim himself had ligature marks on his forearms. Faint, old ones. One of our surviving victims from Baltimore had scratched her attacker badly enough to draw blood before he overpowered her. We'd recovered touch DNA from under her nails, but the sample had been too degraded to run clean against anything in the system. Looking at the body on that stained carpet, I felt that ugly investigative instinct stir, that hateful little bloom of hope. We ran everything. Prints came back muddy at first, tangled in stolen identities and sealed juvenile records. Dental was useless. Facial recognition produced a parade of men who looked vaguely like him, in the way all exhausted predators eventually resemble one another. But the more we dug, the more the dead man became our ghost. He had worked under one alias or another, at or near 6 of the 8 hotels tied to the murders. Payroll photos matched witness descriptions from 2 surviving staff members who remembered a maintenance guy who kept to himself and asked weirdly specific questions about female guests. We found traces of victim blood in stitching inside the duffel bag. We found a hidden storage locker in Newark containing uniforms, stolen toiletries from hotel rooms, and jewelry from 3 confirmed victims wrapped in hand towels. It should have felt like victory. Instead, I remember standing in our temporary command post staring at a whiteboard full of women's faces and feeling cheated. No arrest, no interrogation, no confession, no moment where he looked across a table at me and I got to ask him why he thought loneliness made someone pray. He was just meat now, cooling in a county morgue drawer with a toe tag, and some other person had decided he was done living. For a few days, the question of who killed him seemed secondary. Then it became the only question that mattered. The room had been booked under the name Elise Warren, fake, obviously, paid with cash through a third-party reservation kiosk that gave us nothing but grainy footage of a hooded figure and a timestamp. No plates on nearby cameras, no useful prints, no witnesses who remembered anything beyond someone who looked like a woman, or maybe a man in a scarf. Atlantic City, like every city, specialized in forgetting strangers. I worked the booking angle anyway, because sometimes the smallest clerical decision is the crack that breaks a case. I traced every prior use of the name I could find. Credit applications, short-term rentals, 1 storage unit in Delaware opened and closed in 48 hours. All dead ends. Bureau databases gave me nothing solid. State systems gave me less. Weeks passed. The Atlantic wind got colder. The task force thinned as people were reassigned. Officially, the night porter case was functionally closed, pending final identification and a few neat bows for the U.S. Attorney. Unofficially, I kept Elise Warren pinned on my board because I hated loose threads. That was when Daniel Mercer called me. Danny and I had crossed paths years earlier overseas, the kind of bureaucratic overlap where everyone pretends agencies cooperate naturally and nobody mentions the turf wars. He was CIA, though men like Danny never just say CIA. They say things like, I'm with Langley, or I do analysis now. Like the truth might ignite if exposed to oxygen. He was in D.C. on some liaison business and asked if I wanted a drink. We met in a quiet bar near DuPont, where the lighting was flattering, and the staff minded their own business. He listened while I talked through the Atlantic City murder, not because I expected insight, but because saying a thing aloud sometimes reveals its shape. When I got to the alias, I saw something change in his face. Not surprise. Recognition, followed by that immediate professional regret. What? I asked. He took a sip, buying time. That name. Elise Warren. You know it? He looked around the room, more habit than necessity. Not officially. Danny. He rubbed his thumb along the condensation on his glass. It's a hotel alias, or was. Common enough one, anyway. Female names draw less attention. Less suspicion booking alone. Fewer questions at check-in. Staff don't remember them as well. Some of our people used it over the years. I remember laughing once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes irony is so sharp. Your body mistakes it for humor. A female alias, I said. To avoid suspicion. He nodded, grim. Yeah. I thought of all those murdered women whose names had been noted, sorted, selected precisely because they were female and alone. And here, at the end of the line, the bait in room 814 had been a woman on paper too. Only this one had been a fiction written by people who understood exactly how predators and institutions both make assumptions. Are you telling me one of yours killed him? I'm telling you, that name floated around circles where tradecraft gets taught. Could be one of ours. Could be former military, contractor, anyone who picked up the habit. Don't run with more than that. But I already was. I pictured the killer entering that room with his stolen confidence, seeing a booking under a woman's name, expecting another easy door, another sleeping target. Instead, he found someone waiting, someone who had known what he was before we did, or figured it out faster, someone who beat him half to death, asked questions, and then put a round through his chest, another through his chest again to be certain, and one between the eyes because some people believe in punctuation. The official report never reflected any of that. Officially, we identified the deceased as our unsub through forensic and circumstantial evidence. Officially, his death remained an open homicide with no prosecutable leads. Officially, I never spoke with Danny, and he never told me that Elise Warren was a ghost name carried in the pockets of people licensed to lie. I signed the paperwork. I attended the briefings. I told myself the case was over. But every time I stay in a hotel now, I still test the deadbolt twice. I still wedge a chair under the handle, even in places where that makes no practical sense. And when I pass the front desk and see a lone traveler sliding over a credit card, weary from airports and delays, trusting the building around her to be what it claims, I think about room 814 in Atlantic City, about the man we chased across half the coast, about the other one who found him first, and about the last joke the world told in that room, that a killer who preyed on women died because he believed a woman's name meant weakness. He wasn't the first man to make that mistake. He was just the one I happened to inherit. You can judge me if you like. Most people do, at least in their heads. I'm used to it. I've built a life where perception matters more than truth. So I've heard every silent accusation without a word being said. Yes, I have mistresses. More than one. I won't dress it up as loneliness or unmet needs or anything noble. It's convenience. It's ego. It's the kind of entitlement that grows quietly when you have money, influence, and very few people willing to tell you no. My wife knows, in the way people sometimes know things, without ever confirming them. But our marriage isn't built on romance. It's built on alignment. We're both very well off, and more importantly, we're very visible. Our business depends on stability, on the image of a strong, united family. Investors like certainty, clients like wholesomeness, a smiling couple at charity galas, 2 children in tailored clothes, a house that looks like it belongs in a magazine. We provide that. Behind closed doors, we live separate lives that occasionally overlap for appearances. It works, or at least it did. This isn't a story about guilt. Not really. It's a warning. About a year ago, I took one of my regular companions to a hotel. Not one of the usual places. I'm careful, generally. Discreet high-end hotels, places that understand privacy, that don't ask questions because they don't want answers. But that night, I wasn't thinking clearly. We'd been at a function. Too many eyes, too many acquaintances, and I wanted somewhere anonymous, somewhere forgettable. We drove out past the city, past the kind of places people like me don't usually go. The hotel was small, older, the sort of place with a flickering sign and carpets that had seen better decades. I remember hesitating in the parking lot. Not for long, just a flicker of instinct telling me this was beneath me. Risky in a way I couldn't quite define. I ignored it. Inside, the front desk clerk barely looked at us. Paid in cash. No questions. No record beyond a name I didn't usually use, but one I'd used enough times to feel safe. The room itself was unremarkable. Cheap, but clean enough. A bed, a chair, a TV bolted too high on the wall. The kind of mirror you don't notice. Large, fixed above the dresser, reflecting the entire room without distortion. We stayed less than 2 hours. Afterward, I dropped her off, went home, kissed my wife on the cheek, and sat down to review contracts like nothing had happened. Because to me, nothing had happened. It was just another night, in a long series of nights that blurred together. A week later, I got the email. It didn't go to my main account. It went to one of the quieter ones, the kind I use for things that don't need to be traced back too easily. That alone caught my attention. The subject line was simple. You should see this. I almost deleted it. Spam, I assumed. But there was an attachment, and something about the timing, the quiet precision of it, made me open it instead. The file was a video. I didn't recognize the angle at first. A wide shot of a hotel room, slightly distorted, like it was being viewed through glass. Then I saw myself. There's a specific kind of cold that hits you when you see yourself from the outside like that. Not in a mirror, not in a reflection you control, but from a fixed, uncaring perspective. There's no editing, no flattering angles, just truth. The camera hadn't been in the room. It had been behind the mirror. The realization hit all at once. The placement, the clarity, the way the entire room was visible, unobstructed. That mirror hadn't been just a mirror. It had been watching. The email had no greeting, no name. Just a message beneath the attachment. We know who you are. We know who your wife is. We know what this would do to your business. Then a number, a demand, and a final line. Do not ignore this. I sat there for a long time, replaying the video, not out of morbid fascination, but because my brain refused to accept it the first time, or the second, or the third. It wasn't just that I'd been recorded. It was how easily it had happened, how casually I'd walked into that room, how confidently I'd assumed I was in control of my own secrets. I've spent years building layers of protection, legal, financial, personal. I know how to hide things. I know how to make problems disappear. But this wasn't something I could control in the usual ways. Because whoever sent that email didn't just have a video. They had leverage. They knew exactly what mattered to me and, more importantly, what would collapse if that video ever saw the light of day. Not just my marriage, though that would certainly fracture beyond repair, but the business, the partnerships, the carefully constructed image that everything rested on. You can survive scandal in private life. You can't always survive it in public. I won't tell you how much I paid. I won't tell you how long it went on, because that's the part that changes, depending on how desperate you are. What I will tell you is this. It didn't stop with one payment. It never does. Once you respond, once you show them you're afraid, you've already lost. You're no longer a victim of opportunity. You're an asset, a resource, something to be managed and drained carefully over time. I tried to trace it. Hired people far more skilled than I am in that regard. They found nothing useful. The email bounced through too many layers. The hotel itself? By the time I went back, under a different pretense, the room had been renovated. The mirror replaced. The staff changed. No records of the clerk who checked us in. It was as if the entire place existed solely for that purpose. Maybe it did. So yes, judge me. Say I deserved it. Say it's what happens when you live a double life. You won't be entirely wrong. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because people like me think we understand risk. We think money and caution make us untouchable. We think the worst consequences are the ones we can see coming. They're not. The worst ones are quiet, patient, built into places you don't think to question. So if you take anything from this, anything at all, let it be this. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels too anonymous, too easy, too indifferent to who you are, walk away, because someone, somewhere, might already be watching. And by the time you realize it, it's far too late.